Hello, and welcome again to Table Talk. This is a weekly video and reflection guide so that you can gather around the dinner table or small group table in order to continue to learn and grow from our Sunday morning messages. I'm Robert Mercer, one of the pastors at Asbury United Methodist Church. We are now in the season of Lent, and as a church family, we are reading through the Gospel of Mark together. Our scripture reading from the second Sunday in Lent is from chapter 2, verse 23 through chapter 3, verse 6. I invite you to hear these words from Mark's Gospel. One Sabbath, he was going through the cornfields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grains. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for any but the priest to eat. And he gave some of his companions. Then he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.' Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he could cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, 'Come forward.' Then he said to them, 'Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?' But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him." An early and contentious interaction between Jesus and the Pharisees happened at the beginning of our reading for this week. On the Sabbath, Jesus' disciples were performing work that was forbidden by the rituals and traditions of Judaism. The Pharisees take following the law seriously, and so they challenge Jesus about his disciples' actions. Jesus reminds the Pharisees that human beings were not made so that the Sabbath would have law-abiding practitioners. No, the Sabbath exists to benefit human beings so that they would have a day of rest to focus upon God and how their lives were a gift from that loving, creating, and saving God. The Sabbath lasts from sundown on Friday through nightfall on Saturday each and every week. We are introduced to the concept of Sabbath in the two passages in the Old Testament that cover the Ten Commandments. The practice of Sabbath is given to help God's people remember that God created the world and universe in 6 days, and on the seventh day, God rested. As well as that God saved his people from slavery in Egypt and brought them into freedom, the Sabbath was a weekly time to recover physically as well as to recover spiritually. It was a time to remember that God is and what God has done, as well as to recenter our lives as God's special and set-apart people. The disciples may have violated the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law cares much more about how the disciples listened and followed Jesus more than if they ate some grain on the Sabbath. Think about your own weekly calendar. How much of your week is dedicated solely to God? How are you being reminded daily or weekly that you are God's beloved and that you are called to be God's witnesses in the world? How are you taking the time to recover physically and spiritually? Take some time to consider these questions, and remember to click on the link below to download a Table Talk Reflection Study Guide with questions and other resources for conversation as you faithfully worship, serve, and grow.